Okay, welcome parents to today's webinar on the admissions updates and in regards to testing. We're very excited to have Testtakers. Testtakers has been, and the director of Testtakers, Jeremy Craig. As you know, Testtakers has been working with NIST on SAT preparation for the last year or so. Very successful feedback from parents and students on how well Jeremy and his team have assisted our students in feeling confident going into the SAT testing. And as we know, there's been a lot of news and misinformation around the SATs, and there's certainly been a whole mix of different conflicting information out there. So the purpose or the goals of today is just to update you in regards to universities, what's happening around the world, give us some updates from Singapore, from Thailand, and around the world on what's been happening with admissions and trends and patterns, and talk about how the SAT fits into to this big picture of college admissions, not only in the United States, but really around the world, which, as you're aware, our NIST students are applying to. So parents and students, we're just going to begin here. Jeremy's just going to start us off. I'll just give us an overview of today's presentation, and I'll hand it over to Jeremy. Then he's going to hand it back to me to go through what's been happening region by region with NIST applicants. And the main purpose of today too is for you parents and students who are as year 12 students. This is an important time of the year. We're just starting, as you know, with us as your college counseling team. We are starting the UniQuest meetings where you're picking your universities, your top 10 schools that you're thinking of for university, not only in the US, but around the world for most of us. But one of the considerations is Testtakers is offering a songkran during the break. Will students have time, before they actually start their year 12 pre-IB exams. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's a wonderful break for them to engage with preparation for the SAT, which is occurring right after the songkran break on the date of, I believe it's May the 8th this year. So the timing works perfectly. We've tried to arrange it according to, we know that families are busy, with the holiday season and in celebrating. So we've arranged the timings to best suit families during this time. Parents as well, we have a Q&A section at the end. We've come up with some questions that some popular misconception questions or general kind of questions about admissions and about the SATs. But please, we will address any Q&A questions. Please put them in the, as you'll see there on your screen, you can put those in there, and we will address those as we go through the presentation, and certainly after if we don't get around to that. So we're just going to take it country by country today. I'll talk about what I've seen as a counselor and what I've heard from other regions as well, and from the admissions teams themselves about UK and Europe, Australia, New Zealand. We'll look at the US and Canada, and this is a new update on Asia as well that we've added, which I think is an important one because we do have a lot of parents that are considering Asia as a university destination, and why not? There's some wonderful reasons too, and particularly in light of the pandemic, we've seen a surge of applicants around. Some wonderful universities that have joint programs and with universities around the world. So it's a wonderful region to explore. Jeremy's going to talk a little more about updates, test optional. I'll talk more about that. Recommendations, what your son or daughter should be doing, year by year. So this, from year 11 to senior year. And this is the big one, that the misconceptions around the SAT. And Jeremy's got some great articles that if you go to his to the website for Testtakers, there's the most up-to-date kind of great sharing resources on misconceptions around the SAT and recent updates and points of view, to change your mind around whether this test is still important or not, based on all the radical decisions that have been made in the last year or so. So let's get started here. Yeah, Jeremy, you want to talk, maybe just start us off with this?
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, James. There's a Chinese aphorism, which means to cross the river by feeling for stones. And right now, the entire situation for education, for the economy, for everything is really kind of in flux. And sometimes it's best not to plan ahead too much and just figure out it one step at a time, one stroke at a time, one shot at a time. So the important thing is to know that as James and I prognosticate and try to predict the future about what's going to happen, everything could change in 3 months, 6 months, etc. The only saving grace, I suppose, in education is things tend to happen a little bit slowly. It's like a big ship that needs to get steered by a bunch of tugboats. But long story short, universities around the world need students. And these universities need students for their own survival. And any policies that are restrictive for your kids going to great universities are probably going to get less restrictive in the next 12 to 24 months as the shakedown occurs. And there's a lot of just bad information about what the situation is at particular universities, what the policies are. And I spend a couple hours a day talking to parents, just telling them to stop listening to their friends on WhatsApp. So the important thing is to trust information from a trusted source and be very circumspect when getting information from other parties. All right, James.
Yeah. So in regards to, so as Jeremy said, right, that there's a lot of misinformation around there in regards to university options and what you should do to get into these, top tier schools. But I'm just going to go what we've seen from the admissions from our point of view here at NIST and talking to colleagues in Singapore and here in Thailand and around the world. And the admissions offices themselves. So here's what's been happening in regards to the UK and Europe. So as you're aware, in the UK, many universities made the decision right away. With the pandemic, Cambridge University was completely online last year. I've talked to many of my students in the UK who are current international students there. They've created these residence bubbles where students have to sort of stay within the realm based on subject area of their particular institution or whatever they're studying. So and in terms of sheer numbers of students allowed on campus, just with social distancing, it's been it's typically if a residence there were 2,000 spots, you're looking at 200 now available for students in housing. So consequently, many international students have made that decision to learn virtually for the entire year. My students who've decided to go to the UK, they're in their residence now, but the big lectures, as you know, have been the more than 200 students or 150 lectures have been canceled, or canceled live. So they're streaming those virtually, and then students are able to do 2 or 3 classes a week, in person, based on whatever the specific criteria is for those universities in the UK. So that's sort of been the story there. So the experiences have been, speaking to students, it's over. Some of them going away and getting situated has been a positive thing for them. Some decided to. Some UK students, like UCL is an example of this. UCL was online from September up into just last week. So and same thing with Cambridge. Some universities in the UK, it really varies, but they're just starting live back now that they're starting to vaccinate the population. But what we've seen, and it's really surprising because Jeremy and I talked about this at our webinar at the start of the year, and we really thought that the UK was going to be hit hard by applications, that students were going to kind of veer away from that. But in fact, the opposite has happened this year with the UK. There's been a surge of applications, and particularly from students from China. We've seen what's happened is there's with fractious relations between the US and China and frosty transactions between Australia and China. They're 2 biggest university markets for international Chinese students. More students from China have been looking at the UK as really a popular destination. It's the second most popular destination for international students, and I expect it to these numbers to increase. Last year it was around 500,000 international students in the UK, but we expect it to climb up once we have the final tally. The other thing that made unfortunately this double impact of having this more students applying to the UK and other students who wanted to stay behind or take a gap year or defer to the following year, burnish some skills. It's made it very difficult to get into the elite universities. Talking to other schools in the region here in Thailand and in Singapore, Cambridge and Oxford are very difficult. They were very difficult schools for students to get into this year. And a lot had to do not only with the sheer numbers applying, but also the fact that universities did allow for so many deferments to happen. So it's just these top tier UK schools, even schools like the ones like the traditional, the UCL, Kings, those schools were, if you had 35, 36 points, that was a slam dunk. We're still waiting for many offers from these schools. So it's been, the things, as Jeremy mentioned, everything is in flux, things change, and in this job in college counseling and in the world of college admissions, things change often. And so we just, as parents and as students, we just have to, be realistic about what's happening and make backup plans accordingly. Other things around Europe, just so that's a bit of an update on the UK. In regards to Europe, the Netherlands is the third most popular destination where our students from NIST apply, and it's been no different this year. In spite of what's happened with COVID, we did have last year from our graduating class of 2020 that the students did, in fact, there weren't any of them that decided to stay behind. They actually went to Europe and are similar to the UK, living in these smaller residential bubbles, not doing the big lectures. But they're slowly adjusting to that, and we're seeing this year, just with our students in particular, that there's many applications there, and for good reason. The Netherlands it's a 3-year university degree. It's in English speaking. They have a liberal arts degree similar to the US schools, and many students will do their undergrad in the Netherlands, and the sheer cost, right, is much less than the US. You're looking at, for an international student, less than $9,000 US to just for the tuition, which is that's unheard of in the U.S. So many students are doing a 3-year degree in the Netherlands and then going off and completing a master's degree in the U.S. And it's funny that we even see some of the students from the United States who are U.S. passport holders that do the metrics and come up with do the spreadsheet and say, wait a sec, if I send my daughter to the University of Amsterdam for 3 years, in the Netherlands, she can get a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and then go do a master's back home in Virginia. But it's very difficult with international families, in particular in the U.S., establishing residency and getting financing for these schools. So the Netherlands is definitely a popular institution. Last point here, because this is more of a guess from our perspective, that the increased applications to EU schools thanks to Brexit changes. Well, what we're seeing is that because of the fee structure change, students from Europe who might traditionally apply to the UK are looking sort of within or staying close to home because the fee structure is close to formerly with Brexit, students were able to attend UK universities for, I think it was £11,000 a year or something based on the public system, but those have increased to around £17,000. So it's for students, even if you have a European passport. So many are staying within their own countries to European passport holders to pursue their degrees there, and then maybe do their masters later on in the UK. But just as a general, just to wrap it up, the UK. We at the start of in June, July, Jeremy and I were predicting that the UK would see a massive decline in applications due to the fee structure changes and particularly with the pandemic as well that was raging there. But this year we did see a massive increase in populations, and we're still awaiting responses from many UK universities. In regards to Australia and New Zealand, this is a very we've talked about this before, very sad story. Australia is heavily dependent on international students, the most dependent, in fact, of all the university systems. It's the third most, Australia is the third most popular destination for international students. So the US is still number one, followed by the UK. And then Australia comes in in third place. They have nearly 500,000 students, international students that they host there. There's 40, I believe it's 44 public universities there. They have a smaller number of schools than the UK or the US. And because of that, they are the most adversely impacted by this. They predicted in the next 3 years, they're going to lose something like $15 billion. They've let off 17,000 university staff in Australia. So it's just been a massive They've taken a massive financial hit because of this. The other thing that is important to note is the restrictions on flights. The mentality is that, and for good reason, the Australian government is supporting bringing back, repatriating Australians. So many foreign students have been online since January when the pandemic started, and they're still not able to enter the country. So they're working on a solution to that. But there's some wonderful universities there. Australia ranks very highly with all the different programs around the world. Melbourne University is a top 20 QS ranking university in the world. But as you can see here, they've dropped, just to incentivize students for coming to Melbourne. Some of the programs, like the Bachelor of Arts program that used to be 38 points, has dropped to 32 points. So to go to an elite university with a good IB score, but not an elite IB score is certainly an incentivization for some students to attend. The other things that, and you can see here, some of these smaller universities like University of Tasmania, dropping in terms of they're cutting different programs or majors. So we're just seeing massive cuts in that regard. The other thing that it's been a big experiment from Australia has been they really have been focusing. One thing that I really appreciate, it's a radical experiment, but they're for students who are pursuing engineering type degrees or medical degrees, jobs of the future. The Australian government is heavily subsidizing those programs. So you can see that last point on their variable course fees based on a field of study, a big experiment. So they really are trying to dissuade students from pursuing a liberal arts degrees there. They're really going for this ultra specialization, which I think is going to be a really it's very brave to do so. We really haven't gotten this. This is an initiation that came out of March of last year. So we haven't seen any fall through on that. But just as a wrap up, Australia, as mentioned, has taken a severe financial hit. But then again, it is an opportunity for international students who are looking for elite universities. This is the time to the elite universities where they've dropped requirements for some programs. It's a wonderful time to go, and they really want international students back again. So they're going to strongly incentivize you as parents and students to attend. So this would be the time to look for scholarship offers and fits for that. Moving on to the U.S. and Canada, as was mentioned, just for the applications for the former year, based on everything being in flux at the start of the year, many students chose to defer offers. Many students started online in the U.S. and in Canada, but ended up, because of Zoom fatigue, many students ended up just not continuing, taking a break. So it's one of the things in regards to the U.S. and Canada is that what we saw just talking to our students who are attending virtually, many found that during the frosh week, when the initiation activities, it was tough to feel connected to the schools, to many of the lessons that were online. It was difficult as well for students. Some schools in the U.S. And in Canada were not allowing foreign students to enter, and everything had to be done virtually. So students just decided, last minute, September, October, to not continue and to defer their offer until the fall when things got better. Similar to the UK and Australia, what Canada and the US have done is they've created these bubbles as well in the residence halls where they'll put students together who are pursuing similar programs, limited access to campus facilities during this time. I think they've done a really good job, however, the United States and Canada and all the universities in communicating, giving weekly updates to students. They've been telling them, about what is open and closed on campus, how they can, what students and parents can do to reach out for help and extra support. So they've really been taking that pastoral, line of care. But many university students who are there that I've talked to in the U.S. and Canada, they're very empty now. There's a sense of this emptiness about the university campuses, as mentioned, these residence halls, because of social distancing and regulations. Residence halls that used to host 2,000 to 4,000 students are down to, less than 200. So, just in terms of there's a lack of vibrancy on many of the campuses. So, but what we're seeing is, irregardless of that, one thing that we were anticipating, this is back in July and in August, that there'd be a decline in applications to the U.S. So what we've seen is the top 10 schools in the U.S. and Canada have seen, exponential surges. So, for example, the University of California, UCLA, last year in 2020, they received 200,000 applications. This year in 2021, they've received over 300,000 applications. So that's a 50% increase. So the reasons being for that is that, as you know, these schools have gone, all schools are pretty much test optional or test blind in the case of the University of California system. So the test blind is that in the University of California system is that they cannot look at an SAT score or test. There's no possible way to send this result to the University of California system. So students from the US and around the world are like, okay, I didn't do well on the SATs. I've got, pretty solid grades. I can apply now. These are students who normally wouldn't have been able, or they would have been able to apply, but they certainly wouldn't have had the grades for that. So what we're seeing in the University of California, we just saw a surge due to the SAT going blind. Test optional is another. This is something that Jeremy and I are going to talk about at the end with the Q&A. Universities did not. One of the big metrics for the top schools, if you're looking at the Harvards, if you're looking at University of Pennsylvania, these schools were using the SATs as a way to kind of measure students' academics on a standardized format. So the SAT test is a standard test that everybody takes. There was a certain even level playing field with this SAT test, and due to COVID and due to almost 30% of students in the U.S. not being able to access the SAT, they were kind of, their hand was tied in regards to test optional. But what we do notice and what we have noticed is that to get to the Ivy League schools or the Ivy Plus schools, having a strong SAT score was critical. So even though the schools went test optional, by students submitting, an SAT score, having that extra credential made a difference in their applications and getting in. The students who didn't submit a high SAT score, that impacted their application. There's some exceptions to this, of course. If a student couldn't access the SAT, for example, if they were in one of the hot zones of COVID in New York or Florida, for example, and SAT testing was not available, that universities didn't use that as a way to they didn't put that against students. But I think what we're noticing is that particularly because we were pretty lucky in Thailand and to have testing available to us. So for those elite schools, that we're definitely looking at SAT scores for measuring, looking at grades in comparison to other students. And as you know, there's massive grade inflation in many parts of the U.S. So those tests can, the scores on transcripts from not IB, but we're talking about the public schools, are just flooded with these inflated A's. So the SAT is the barometer whereby college admissions can look at, okay, well, do the A's on the transcript match the SAT score? Just a couple last points here. So as mentioned, the most competitive schools have gotten more competitive. As was mentioned, UCLA's, it's good. We don't, those decisions are going to, for UCLA, Berkeley, and University of San Diego, we will be getting those decisions in the next couple weeks. It's typically the end of March when they release those, the decisions. But they're certainly becoming more competitive than they ever were. And as mentioned for the Ivy Leagues, those are becoming, due to deferrals to students, there just isn't enough housing. There aren't enough spots at these Ivy League type of schools for students anymore. So there's a long lineup of students waiting to get in. Jeremy, do you want to jump into any in terms of the elite schools? Yeah.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think important that it's not just the top 10 schools; it's the top the big name brand top 25, top 30 schools are seeing this bump in applicants. It's just getting that much harder to get in. I will say though that just more broadly, as schools get harder to get in, our rising tide lifts all the boats. And a kid who previously might have gotten into Columbia now is going to get into only NYU, for instance, or a kid that wouldn't get into NYU would now go to St. John's. So that should hopefully maybe lead to an upsurge in quality of the schools that maybe aren't in the top tier, in the second tier, as they get more strong applicants, then the entire student body will just get stronger. But that's not something we're going to be able to sort of measure for another 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, so that's just it. Like this, I think the expectations, like the things, I think that first point, everything is in flux and things are changing. So the scores that got in last year are not going to be the scores that got into the top schools, formally. So it's important to, as parents and students to be open to, yes, have the reach for aspire for the top schools, but also, be content with the schools that are also excellent, have excellent reputations and thrive there as well. And there's just a swath of books and articles that support the idea that it doesn't matter, which institution you go to, it's what you do with the, your studies. You'll find your path essentially wherever you go. Your life mission, if it's to get into Harvard and that doesn't happen, it doesn't mean that it's over. There's no possible way to get that. It's a longer pathway. So just being open to the possibility of different options as they're occurring. So last week we had a presentation for parents, as you know, on Asia, and because of COVID, it's becoming an increasingly more popular destination. We've seen, certainly from our school, more students applying to schools in Thailand. Singapore has seen a massive surge of institutions. Hong Kong's, I think parents and students are sometimes a little bit trepidatious about it due to the political situation. But when you look at just this point here, just about Singapore, with Yale NUS and NTU, a lot of these have partnerships with top schools in the UK and the US. So for example, Yale NUS, I believe they have a program with Berkeley. NTU has a program with Cambridge. There's just many examples of that. So parents are looking, now one of the trends is staying closer to home. Families content working in Bangkok, but don't want to travel. Just not possible now to travel as far a distance to go see their sons and daughters in the US or further afield. So this year, just some trends from what we've seen is Singapore has definitely gone up in numbers. Thailand, some other ones that Malaysia is another one that one is more for medicine specific. They have a program at the University of Nottingham in Malaysia, so that's for medical programs. But with Thailand, we've seen students applying for engineering programs this year, medical programs, business schools. Japan and Korea is definitely a surging market, and Japan, I believe, they've got Temple universities. They've got 3 or 4 American universities that are situated there. The cost is much less as well for that, and they have that liberal arts style of education. Korea also is probably the best deal going, even better than the Netherlands for international students. Yeah, I believe it's less than $3,000 or $4,000 for an international student to attend Yonsei University, which is a world-ranked top tier school. But Korea is really making an effort to reach out to international students to attend there. They really they want to diversify and have a more just a better, a broader student perspectives at the university. The last point there, the SATs is for Asia. It is one of those that is still many institutions are still looking for minimum scores. So if you have the IB diploma, for example, in Japan, some of them will take the IB predicted scores. However, the SAT score is just as I mentioned before, it really is that extra credential that you can have on your application to differentiate yourself from the other applicants and show universities that your transcript matches the scores that you receive. But it isn't the be all and end all though. And if you're a strong, IB student and you're not applying to say the Harvard or the UPenn, then then it's if you do have a strong SAT, you have a strong IB score, then maybe in that regard, if you don't score well on the SAT score or on the SAT test, then there's no point in sending that result in. And we've seen examples of with students applying to NYU, for example. Here's a perfect example. NYU says, send us your SAT score or your IB results. Now, some students say, well, I want to send my SAT, I want to send them both. It's like, no, don't send both. You have a strong IB score, don't send your SAT scores. We tell students to do this, they don't do it, and guess what happens? If they have a low SAT score, that can be perceived in a negative light from a university. So the SAT score is only something you want to send if you're happy with the result and you think it can bump your application. So these are some of the misconceptions that we're going to talk about in the Q&A as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeremy, and he's going to go into a little bit of history about the SAT, and then we'll take it back to Q&A and going year by year with what students should be doing.
Okay, thank you very much. And for a more broad-ranging talk about the history of the SAT and the exact format, I'd encourage you to take a look on the YouTube channel that you all have access to later on that has more involved talks on this. So I'm just going to storm through this rather quickly and then just move on to the actual what's going on today. So the SAT grew out of a test that was given to people who got drafted into the Army, the American Army. If you did really well, you ended up as someone's valet. If you didn't do well, you're the guy at the front of the boat going over to Omaha Beach. After World War II, the universities expanded greatly and they needed some standardized yardstick, so that they took the SAT as it was and adapted it. Now, the SAT in 1945 would be unrecognizable to the SAT that kids take today. And indeed, every 9 or 10 years, it goes through an iteration, a change to try to update it for the more modern world. But anyway, now it's taken by over 2 million students every year, making it one of the most widely tested given in the world. Now, it's an important factor in admissions, but again, grades have always been the most important thing. A lot of people say, well, now the SAT is optional. What are schools going to look at? Well, they always will look at grades first. Your IB result represents 2 years of hard graft, and your SAT result is how well do you take a specific test on a given Saturday morning. Now, for American school requirements, we'll get into this a little bit later with specifics for different years, but basically schools can't require kids do something that they can't do. SAT, as James alluded to, has not been available for kids in large swaths of the states. So it's not even international, it's not even considered. And they say, you can't take the SAT in California, then we can't require it. So all schools have had to quickly adapt to be test optional outside Florida. We won't even talk about that. But the upcoming test dates are as follows. Those are May, August, October, December. There are additional test dates available in the states that are not available for us here. Last year, there was another available international test date in September. Whether or not that'll come back, I really don't know. Frankly, College Board, the organization that looks after the SAT, is just about holding it together right now. So getting them to do anything above and beyond to just keep making sure the fires go out isn't really realistic. Now, in terms of scores, if you have national service in Korea, Taiwan, or Singapore, the scores are valid for minimum 5 years. But you don't want to take the test when you're 9th through 10th grade because you're just not ready for it. Okay, so we'll go from there, James.
Yep.
Now, in terms of what score do I, quote, need, there's no minimum score to get into American universities. There are minimum scores to get into Asian universities. There are minimum scores to get a scholarship if you go to University of Florida. But those are scholarships only generally available to American students. Now, in terms of 1100, that's a solid score. That means you showed up, you did pretty well. Some great schools there. University of West Virginia, St. John's, if you're into finance, it's a school just outside New York City. No one in Asia has heard of it. Everyone in New York City has. Great basketball team. 1300, then you're in the really rock solid land grant universities. Most of you would have heard of Georgia, Connecticut, UC Santa Barbara, UMass Amherst, where I grew up. Lovely part of the world. American University, great school in DC. If you get 1500 or so, that's going to be your median score to have a look at these top schools. These are top tier elite schools. Now, Even if you have a perfect score and a perfect IB, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get into any school. It will get you into University of Connecticut, University of West Virginia for sure. But I had a student a few years ago, perfect IB, perfect SAT scores, perfect, rejected, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Columbia. And he went to University of Chicago, which is arguably as good, if not better than those schools. He studied economics, which is what Chicago is kind of renowned for. And now he's a hedge fund manager doing very, very well indeed. So the admissions process is holistic, but that's a whole different sort of kettle of fish we won't even touch today. But importantly, if you get a score that's really, really high, that doesn't guarantee you're going to get into Berkeley, but it certainly won't hurt your chances. Okay, next up, James. Now, just to rehash what we've alluded to earlier, every school in America is now test optional. Some schools have committed to being test blind for maybe even 2 years. And mainly University of California was forced to do so by the courts. And they're still kind of figuring out themselves. Again, walking across the water by feeling through stones. So basically what's happening now is there's a steady drumbeat of schools that said, okay, for 2021 kids, we're test optional. And now they're coming out saying, okay, we're just going to extend this policy for 2022 kids as well. So current IB1 or 11th graders is going to be test optional next year. We can pretty much not guarantee it, but 99% sure it's going to be test optional as well. That means that other metrics are going to be looked at very carefully. Now, you doing the IB, you're lucky. The IB is a nice standardized yardstick. And as James alluded to earlier, a grade point average in America is a mess. There's certain schools that everyone has an A-, everyone has an A. So how do you differentiate yourself? And then it comes into playing cello or being on the equestrian team and all that nonsense, which are good things, but it's going to be harder indeed for these schools like University of California with tens and hundreds of thousands of applications to say, well, how do we compare apples to apples here? So it'll be interesting indeed to see what the result will be with the SAT in 2 or 3 years as all this shakes out, hopefully. Now, the individual policies at the school change month on month. Check the school websites, and even the school website might have not been updated yet until for the 2022 cycle. They're still worrying about putting bums on seats for August this year. Talk to your university advisor, check the school Twitter feed. Sometimes this stuff comes out on Twitter before it comes out elsewhere, before they get around to updating the website. But basically, don't trust what you heard from someone or heard on some chat room on Reddit. Get it straight from the horse's mouth, from the university itself or from the university counselor. Now, as James alluded to earlier, if you're looking at a school that has, say, a median SAT admitted student, get that from your data from an IST, whatever school you go to. You know that school A has a median SAT score of 1,400 and you're scoring a 1,500, then you want to show them that. If you're scoring a 1,300, maybe you don't show that information because it's not going to help you. It's a bit like a dating profile. You only want to show the good bits. You don't want to show the bad bits. And then again, talk to your university counselor about this because it is a very dicey game right now. And all schools are a little bit different in terms of what their actual policies are. Okay, next up, James. Recent changes. Essay and subject test, done, thank goodness. Officially discontinued. The subject tests were declining for years and years and years, and the essay was a mess anyway. So in order to make things simple, they just got rid of them rather suddenly, just about 2 months ago. So no reason to do those tests, no reason to even worry about them. And again, as we've alluded to a couple of times, University of California, so all the UCs, UCLA, UC Berkeley, UC Davis, et cetera, all of those schools are now test blind, which means the university never even sees the score. And what impact that will have on their classes will be very interesting indeed. Now, test availability, you at NIST are lucky. I've got kids in Singapore at the Tanglewood Trust, the British style school, who've been bumped 4 different test dates to take the actual SAT. So test availability is highly limited. Register early, register often. If you can't take the test, it gets canceled on you. Don't worry. Don't get on a boat trying to go somewhere else to take it because for you, they won't look at the test. You'll have an excuse to not take it, so to speak. Universities need students, especially international students who pay full fare. So the universities are going to make it partially easier for you to get in with caveats if you're applying to the really top schools. Now, many of the changes are still oncoming, which is why we're doing these webinars about every 6 weeks now, just to have one current that we can throw up there to try to keep on track of everything. And I'm sure that James is the same. I spend about an hour a day sifting through about 20 newsletters that I get just to try to stay current on all this information because things are changing so quickly. Now, The ACT is the competitor to the SAT, Coke and Pepsi, rugby league, rugby union. Pretty much they test the same thing, but the big difference is availability. The ACT is administered on a computer as a grand experiment that they started before COVID, probably regretting now. And it is available, but very, very limited. And we have concerns of whether or not they're going to be able to pull off the international, because ACT about 6 months ago let go all their international staff. So it is technically available in certain places, but we have profound concerns. Better to dance with the girl that you brought to the prom. You know, SAT is accessible, it's a known quantity, go with that. Also, the ACT has one practice test available, one, and that practice test is about 5 years old, whereas the SAT has 10 practice tests. So the prep materials for SAT are far superior. All right. When to test, not too early, please. The earliest test date that you should ever look at would be December of IB1 or grade 11. Before then, you would not have covered a good chunk of the math, not a good, but a good chunk of the math that you haven't covered in the IB yet. Testing early, there's really no point. Your SAT score will increase naturally the more school that you attend. So taking the test in August or October of 11th grade is a sheer folly. Something I push back on every year, and I see kids who take it too early. Then they end up in this cycle of prep test, prep test, prep test, and that gets in the way of getting off to a really strong start in 11th grade, which is vital to do well in your grades. And of course, we all know 11th grade grades are the most important thing for getting into schools. So if you're confusing yourself with doing SAT prep in August and September to get ready for the October test date in 11th grade, all that time we better spend working on the IB, making the tennis team, doing all the other things that make you stand out, because it doesn't matter for your applications to university if you take the test in December or March or May. It doesn't matter. They're just going to see a score. So don't start prep too early. You can take it multiple times, but you're going to end up scoring the same thing again and again and again. I'm a pretty handy golfer. I know what I'm doing out there. I'm going to keep scoring 77, 78 every time I play, but I'm not going to score 69. It's just not going to happen. So you're going to settle into where you're at, and then you're just going to be there. Of course, we'll get you there faster, but that's another slide. Talk to your guidance counselor. Everyone's different. If you're really strong artistically and not a great test taker, and you're looking at, say, art schools, don't even worry about the SAT, because they're not going to look at it. So just play to your strengths. Okay. Again, work hard in school. Read more. Please read anything. I find that most kids, when I see them taking a practice test, and the first section of the SAT is 65 minutes long of reading, after about 20 minutes, they just start looking out the window because they don't have reading stamina, we call it. So just sitting down and trying to see how long you can read for, say, 17 minutes. Next day, I'm going to do 18. Don't try to read Jane Eyre or Finnegan's Wake. It's not going to happen. Find something you're interested in. Find whatever sport you play. There's going to be a lot of stuff on that. National Geographic, there's always those floating around somewhere. If you could take Mom and Dad's Economist and read those articles and summarize them, you know what? You're good. You don't need any help for SAT, and you're reading at a collegiate level. Ken Burns documentaries, just to get a little bit of American history background. I won't get into this too much, but one passage on the SAT does require a certain understanding of American history, and Ken Burns is a great place to start. If you're really keen and you got a week off sometime, the English grammar, not SAT grammar, but the English grammar course on Khan Academy is wonderful. And again, Khan Academy for just math and astronomy and all sorts of other stuff is wonderful. It's a question of sitting down and doing it. One thing I can't stress enough, don't do 10 practice tests before you start a formal prep program, because you're just going to reinforce all those bad habits. If you just go out and start hitting a tennis ball against a wall, you're going to get better slowly. But if you have a good pro helping you, you're going to get better much faster. And if you've already done a whole bunch of reps of doing a bunch of tests your way, it's going to make meaningful improvement harder later on. I'd much rather get a kid come to me in 11th grade and say, I took the test once. The most frustrating thing is when I say, oh, my mom made me take 18 practice tests and I'm not going up anymore. Then getting improvement from those students becomes that much harder, because they have to sort of unlearn their old way of doing it and relearn a new way of doing it, which is much harder than just learning the good way or the good tennis grip the first time around. Okay. How to prep later. So this is what you do when you actually know when you're going to take it. First thing, take a practice test. Where do you get a practice test? Not a test prep center. There are 10 practice tests, 10 available on the College Board website, and 10 practice tests available on Khan Academy. Those tests are exactly the same. Khan Academy is partnered with College Board, so they're the same test. Take one of those practice tests on a Saturday or Sunday morning, score it yourself, see where you stand. If you're scoring a 1580, you're in good shape. You don't need to do anything. If you're scoring a 920, you have to have a serious kind of chat with your guidance counselor, see if you need to be going down this path at all. Ideally, a test prep program would culminate with an SAT test date. So you're going to count back 3 months maybe at the most, and sort of lead up to the actual test date. Things to look out for. More isn't better. I get asked to go to China. I used to get asked to go to China to do SAT prep that was 300 hours over the summer, and you run out of diminishing returns kick in, and there just isn't really the best way to do things. Free diagnostic tests, again, you can take your own diagnostic test and score it yourself, and you know that score is legit. Oftentimes, test prep centers, you take a diagnostic test and they score it and they punch your score down. So you think you're only scoring a 1300, you sign up for some big program, and then you score the 1480 that you would have scored the first time without any help at all. Guaranteed improvement, again, it's all what are you improving upon? You need to kind of understand how the SAT fits into the broader university application process, especially now as the university application process is changing every month. So you need to get people who are kind of informed of what's going on. Also, a lot of test prep centers will try to sell you these advising packages of, oh, we'll help you get into Stanford. No, NIST, the international schools you're attending, those people are great. Maybe the university advisors aren't telling you what you want to hear, but maybe they're telling you what you need to hear. So going to somebody else who tell you what they want to hear for a fee is really not the best way forward. Okay. It's what I call the Craig curve. My name is Jeremy Craig. I've been doing this since 1993, if you can believe it. I find kids go up rather rapidly, and then they plateau, and then you want to take the SAT when you're at that plateau. If you just keep doing practice test after practice test fatigue kicks in, and IGCSE scores start to go down. So you don't want to do too much prep because, again, the opportunity cost, I'm an economist by training, of all that time spent doing SAT prep when you could be doing a new CCA, you could be doing a leadership role with something else, you could be doing a MOOC, a STEM training course, or making the tennis team. So it's all those time spent doing SAT prep at the expense of other things. You want to get up to your SAT score that you're capable of getting, you score it, and then you wash your hands of the test and worry about all the other things that ultimately are more important. Okay?
Okay.
Now, James, you can help me with these?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for all the insightful information. As Jeremy mentioned, the timing it's not something that you should spend hours and hours on, and not something you start early. It's right now the skills that that you have students in year 12 with the math and the English. You're at what it is really the purpose of test takers is to give you strategies that you can use to display the stuff that you already have, right? What are some ways that you can be more efficient? It isn't necessarily I'm going to teach you a new math, a whole new set of different math programs. You have all this stuff, but what's a way that you can get through this material expeditiously? So it's just knowing that information and having the support of test takers to guide you on strategies is going to be just a wonderful thing for you to have. Now, in regards to other testing, just with the AP and IB A levels, these are just some updates with, as you know, with IB exams. A lot of seniors were hoping that, okay, IB exams are going to be canceled this year, so we can really bump up our internal assessments and use those as predicted grades. Not the case. IB has been contacting schools on a case-by-case basis, asking if the schools can host the IB exams. We said yes. And they said, great, okay, the IB exams are coming. So our current seniors are going to be writing the IB exams. And that's for Thailand. It's confirmed for Thailand and Singapore. But, around the world, other places are still hotbeds of COVID. So, IB is certainly, it's not going to be safe to do so. In regards to, let's take a look at the A levels. They made a decision early on this. With because of what was happening in the UK, and they've canceled outright the A levels, so they'll be using predicted scores from teachers and their A level results to move forward with that. Other things too, for the AP exams, this is something the College Board, due to many of because of the test optional movement and because of the cancellation of subject tests, the College Board's really been moving forward with really pushing the AP program, particularly in the US. The AP is not, IB is sort of the gold standard for international students, and because it's a much more difficult program to do. And top universities recognize that not only do you have to do 6 courses and in subjects that are not necessarily in your forte, you're forced to do stuff that maybe is not necessarily as traditionally easy for you. And you also have to do the extended essay and the TOK. It's a much harder program than AP, but the College Board is trying to come in now with AP exams and selling that to international schools and really pushing that out with in the US. And with the AP, you can pick and choose. So for example, you could do, I don't want to do that. I don't want to continue with that subject anymore in year 12 and 13. I'm just gonna do 4 APs and get high scores in those. So, but what's happened with AP is that they're sort of replacing now. What they've done is subject tests used to be a very popular option for universities in Thailand in admitting students for medical schools and in other country systems as well, like India. So what they're trying to do now is there still hasn't been a firm decision yet on what these medical schools in Thailand and India are going to use in lieu of these subject tests. But our guess would be that AP testing is going to be on the rise, and it's something you don't even have to do a class in AP. You can simply take the test at the end. So, but these AP tests will be going forward. Other things too, other testing updates. One of the things that we mentioned earlier on was that the UK last year over-admitted students because of the fact that there was no final IB or A-level results, and the predicted scores tend to be, maybe for some students a bit higher than the actual results. So what happened is they had to admit students based on those predicted scores, and hence we saw this backlog of these students that might have ordinarily been based on final results not admitted to these schools. So what should you do now? This is for year 12 parents, but anybody else that's listening to this, what are some things that you can do now to get ready? Well, for us as parents and students of the class of 2022, one thing that we can focus on is, although I think one of the points of this presentation is that, and hopefully this is rang true from what we've been saying to you, it's yes, SAT and ACT will be test optional at most schools next year. But if an intention is to apply to one of these top Ivies, to the Harvards, the UPenns, the Boston College, that having an SAT score is going to be that extra credential that's going to give you the look from these universities. It's not going to, as Jeremy said, it's not going to guarantee that you get into the school. They're always looking for that interesting applicants. They don't even know what they're looking for until they find it. So they might have a student who, as Jeremy mentioned, they might have a special ability, such as they might be in doing some sort of very niche kind of sport, such as rowing, or they might have a musical interest or a musical talent, or they might have done something. They might have done some sort of they might have done something science related that has global implications and is something that has been they might have published something. So they're really looking for not only a high SAT score and high GPA, they're also looking for that differentiating. What's different about this student than the other piles of applicants, and they can choose to be selective with who they take. Other things too, and I think the point is, because of the test optional, there's just so many schools now that are open to, if you feel like there is too much. Don't make the SAT sort of the cornerstone of taking away from your IB scores, because your grades in your IB courses are the most important thing. But one thing Jeremy and his team at Testtakers are offering is, when school is not in session, is during these intensive prep sessions during the Songkran break. This will be an opportunity for students for year 12 students to feel confident going into the test. That's right, but the timing is perfect in that regard. And it's like having a coach really, on your side. You can do it. And it really comes down to confidence. Really your 12 students, you have the skills and the attributes to be successful on this test, but it's something unfamiliar. It's not something you're taught at school on how to take this particular test. And that's why Testtakers is the great choice in that regard to help you navigate this test successfully. So what we're seeing some other things too, students should pay attention more to other things that are becoming more important, extracurricular activities. Making part of my role is helping students to find personal statements that are meaningful and ones that are very insightful, or differentiating personal statements. So the first thing at college, when somebody's looking at your application, an admissions representative only has like they've got a total of 8 minutes to look at a student's application package. So reading a personal statement, it's your first impression with the university. It's the first, here, this is who I am, this is what I do. And you want to create that meaningful, that impactful personal statement right away. So if an admissions representative says, "Oh, I've read this one before. This sounds like something else I've read," you want to engage the reader right away. These kind of things are becoming more important now that SAT tests are not available to most people. So this is part of my work with students to help them. But as mentioned too, the SATs will be, it complements the personal statements. It complements the extracurricular activities that students are doing. For year 11 students, they're really in the careers mode right now. They're getting ready for the work experience week. And for year 12 families and for students, an important part of your college application is going to be what you do over the summer. Now we've offered, as you know, there's internships for students, for year 12 students that are offered over the summer. So do something that students pick. You have a pretty good idea now of something you want to try, a different career. And this can be, getting a letter of recommendation or some extra assistance with your supervisor from the summer. That's what's going to be extremely helpful for you. Jeremy mentioned this before. Reading, it's been shown that it's on the decline. So don't read do read stuff you enjoy. Be able to talk about those articulately. Be passionate about that, but make daily reading a daily habit. And for year 11 students, maybe some recommendations would be to look at some of the practice tests, to look at the Khan Academy and some suggestions at the very earliest. But as Jeremy mentioned, now is the optimal time for year 12 families and students to be taking this SAT preparation session. For the class of 2024, year 10 students, it's too early to worry about anything. Maybe focus on your CCAs. Look at stuff like, is there an instrument that you want to, is there a particular musical passion that you want to pursue? Maybe Spanish, starting something, pursuing passions essentially, and then discovering passions, and then threading them contiguously throughout high school, so you can articulate those committed passions to the universities when you apply. Other things too. Do you want to, Jeremy? Do you want to jump into this one? The misconceptions. Yeah.
This is some of the FAQ that I've been getting, and sort of collated from some school partners here in Singapore. A lot of people are saying, okay, do I need to take the AP tests now that subject tests have gone away? The flat answer is absolutely not. They're very different things. AP tests technically are there to give you advanced credit when you go to American universities, and your IB tests will do the exact same thing. So doing both is just, there's no really compelling reason. As James said, there are certain conditions if you're applying to particular medical schools in Thailand, et cetera. But frankly, that the whole decision with subject tests going away is so recent that even if you then switch to AP tests, you wouldn't be able to get a seat anyway. So you'd be looking at, because AP is only once a year in May, so you can't take it this year and just wait to see what develops for whether or not you might need to take biology next year to get into some medical school somewhere. Should I take subject tests while I still can? No, they're not going to be looked at. Some parents are saying, oh, well, if my son does subject tests and other kids don't, then that'll help him, right? I say no, because schools are committed to not look at those anymore. If a school is test optional to help to send testing, we've done that a few different ways. Broadly speaking, it depends. If it's going to make you look good, go for it. If not, no. What about TOEFL and IELTS? Well, they're still around. You can still take them and look at the school requirements. So though if a school doesn't realize that your school, NIST or wherever, is English language medium, and then if you have a 30-something on the IB, that demonstrates a minimum of English fluency, you have to ask if you really want to go to that same university. But it might be a requirement, particularly for the UK, for visas and whatnot. So to just be aware of those requirements. So it should be fully articulated on the school website, and Mr. Russell and anyone else in that trade would know the answers to that. Summer programs.
Yeah, typically, yeah. Sorry, Jeremy, I just want to jump in on the TOEFL IELTS. Yeah, so typically if students get a 5 or above in standard level English, for most schools, you waive the requirement for the TOEFL or IELTS. In some cases for student visas, the IELTS might be a requirement later on, but you don't need, it's not something you need to worry about as a, you know, a year 12 parent or a student at this point. It's more for taking, you know, later on if the school absolutely pushes back and says the English, you know, your IB English score is not, you know, going to be accepted. So it's nothing to stress over right now.
Okay, yeah. Summer programs. In the last 20 years, there's been a massive rise of summer programs at universities in the States, indeed everywhere. That a lot of people think, oh, if I do the Harvard summer program for $15,000 for 3 weeks, then my son has a better chance of getting into said school. No, that's not the case. Schools have lovely campuses that largely sit there for 3 months empty. So private operators go to them and say, hey, can we just like rent out a third of your campus? They say, sure, and they make some money off it. So going to a school summer program isn't going to help you get into said school. So in terms of stuff to do over the summer, if you're stuck in Singapore, stuck in Bangkok, intern at one of your dad's friends or mom's friends' offices,
yeah,
or maybe try to get a real job. Back when Mr.
Yeah,
Russell and I were,
yeah, I just want to.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I want to mention, sorry, Jamie. I want to mention all year 12 parents, as you know, we sent the announcement out. Do take that opportunity. We are offering internships to all the year 12 students. So pursue that passion. You're going to do it for there's internships from 3 weeks up to 6 weeks. So please, if you need any of those details, I can forward them to you, how to get situated with that. But it's just so much more valuable to find out what you want to do. And it's going to look so great from a college application perspective that you've already, you know, interned at a particular company and have experience. That it just shows that growth and maturity. And it's not common to have an internship if you're in the US or abroad. Like a lot of students who are in year 12 are just kind of, you know, maybe they're doing something else, but it's not common to be able to work at, you know, in an engineering firm or, you know, shadow some medical doctors. So take advantage of that. That's what I would, you know, if I was a year 12 parent and a student, that's what I would be focusing on.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing I did, I think the year after 11th grade, I worked at McDonald's. And let me just tell you that I learned more in that 3 months of McDonald's of what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do and about the real world than I did in my first year at Ivy League University. So taking a grunt job like that, of a quote real world job, it just helps you get some perspective. A lot of the kids I work with are obviously children of privilege, and they don't really have a conception of what the real world means, of what it's like to punch in and punch out for the day. Depends on visas, what you're allowed to do in your respective countries, but having a real job for a while, go and work on a golf course or just do some, you know, don't go and dig ditches somewhere, but do something that you kind of learn a little bit about the real world. And that's a great thing that you can write about on your college essay. Not, you know, I worked with Dad's chiropractor for a few weeks is great, but what I learned working at a, you know, hawker center or something, that will pop much more than your standard university application essay, I think. Now, in terms of whether or not James, if you want to comment on that.
Oh, go ahead. Will the SAT, come back? Well, it's still, I believe that it's still, you know, if you read, Jeremy's posted some interesting articles on different points of view about the SAT, but I still think the College Board's got a lot of money. There's still you know, you know, they've got their hands in a whole bunch of different operations. So I still believe that I think it's going to change. My belief is that it'll change its format from the paper-based test to something digital that's happening with what we saw this year with the UK testing. It worked quite well. Not having these computer labs, but being some sort of a you know, very secure type of something that's encrypted and something that students will be able to access on test day with their own laptop. But there'll be some sort of disabling feature that will this is to ensure that students aren't using the Wi-Fi or internet to access other information. So that's, I think it's going to be forced to change from this because of social distancing and because of what's happened. I just think it's going to move to the digital. That's my belief anyway. I don't know.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the SAT has been talking about going digital as long as I've been doing this. It's like cold fusion. It's always 10 years away. But I think this will accelerate that process. As ACT have proven, it is possible, although with problems. And College Board is going through some digital testing with the AP right now, which is an experiment that they might carry that through with SAT. But whether or not it'll come back, I think it'll be interesting after 2 years of not having the scores or it being optional. Universities are going to look at their classes versus what they had before and do some very heavy thinking with some very heavy metrics and see what, if anything, the SAT brought to the table. And I think a lot of them might hopefully go back to it, just because I'm not going to retire for a few years yet. I need something that I'm good at.
Yeah. Well, it's a standard measure, right? It's a common assessment, and they've just been using it. The Ivy Leagues, it was their bastion. It was what they relied on for years, and all of a sudden you told them last year, hey, we can't use that anymore. It's like they really had to. They were absolutely carboozled by the whole. They were just plummets. They were absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
And if American schools all ran the IB, you wouldn't have an SAT. You wouldn't need it. So but American schools don't, and they never will. So it's always going to be your individual board of education. And an A- in Texas isn't the same as an A- in Missouri. And it might matter just for high schools next door to each other. So again, it's a standard yardstick that in a perfect world of rainbows and unicorns, everyone would be interviewed and you talk to your seventh grade teacher and stuff, but you need a cold hard metric. And in my most recent posting, I'll put it on my blog, the great Andrew Sullivan had a great passionate defense of the SAT that he hits all the main points. But of course, the liberal left, of which I'm part, and then went in and say, oh, it's eugenics, this is terrible thing. But you need something. You need something there, and it's an imperfect metric, but aren't they all? Now, in terms of what American University is going to look at without the SAT, your grades, everything else. We've talked about that a couple different directions. Is the ACT a better option? No, and it's not really any more accessible than the SAT. If you're going to do well on the ACT, you know what? You're going to do well on the SAT and vice versa. It's not like, one thing's very different from the other. They're very different. They're very similar tests of the same type of knowledge, just in different formats. All right, what do we do? SAT prep, that's about it. We have some other kind of pre-programs that we have doing grammar and reading that we might be rolling out virtually. We do some tutoring for the SSAT for high school, although that test is largely unavailable right now. We've been doing this here in Singapore since 2001, and we work generally with most of the leading international schools in the region. I would like nothing more than to hop on a Singapore Airlines flight and go up and stay in a hotel in Sukhumvit Road and teach every day at NIST. But unfortunately, that's just not possible now. But hopefully next school year, we can look into doing in-person programs. That's kind of where we've made our bones. But for the time being, we've gotten very, very good at Zoom. So we do Zoom in small class sizes. We find it's the most important thing. It's also very important the kids kind of know each other, and that it is very useful for doing that well. All our teachers are graduates of top American universities with a wealth of experience on the SAT, not just some smart guy who's really good at math, because those aren't great teachers. Now, the next slide, I think, James, is our program. Quick sales pitch. We've avoided the meat, if you would, of the Socram holidays, the Tuesday through Thursday. So the Monday and Friday you see in the middle, that's pretty intensive. It's 6 hours in a day. So, but by doing that, we crunch everything in, and you get about 80% of the program covered in that week holiday. And then the couple weeks before the SAT, there's one last diagnostic test that we review, some supplemental office hours on Wednesday afternoons, evenings rather, and then you take the test on May 8th, hopefully get a good score, and never worry about the dumb thing ever again. That's the idea. The total cost for that, $750 US. Everything's billed via credit card, PayPal. Register on the website below. I need to change that.
Yeah, and also I think, and I think it's important, like when you look at the schedule itself, you've got extra support with that's going to be critical. You can do it. It's that confidence when you go in. You're just not taking it some students sure can maybe do that on their own, and but think about the amount of time that you're saving as a student, and in terms of having an expert that's been doing this for over 20 years sort of guide you through, okay, avoid this section, don't do this. And it's just that SAT is all about confidence and all about getting it done getting the questions done in the most efficient way possible. And
honestly,
I just think having that.
And in the maths, sometimes it's better not to do certain questions. You just guess on some and focus on others. And there's just about 7 or 8 great techniques that we really focus on. You know how to do algebra, you know how to do geometry. We presume that, but we're more about application of knowledge that you already have to maximize your score on test day. And that's the focus. Okay, and then again, just to bring things to close here, James, it's just the same aphorism, cross river by feeling for stones. Universities need you. They want you to varying degrees, and they will change policy accordingly. And keeping tabs and everything is a bit like reading a book as it's written, but just just relax for the time being. You don't need to make any decisions right away. But just kind of keep your ear to the ground, keep attending these webinars that we'll continue to put on YouTube, and because we're trying to make sense of things as best we can. And again, there's a lot of just bad information, a lot of bunk information floating around out there. So just be really circumspect about what you trust with all things, but especially all things education.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to post this. We'll get the recording. We should have it by tomorrow at the latest. I'll send this out to all parents and to students. And yeah, we really encourage you, if you're applying to the US or other places, you've got the best test preparation in the world, in my estimation. And a company that's Jeremy and his team have been doing this for over 20 years. And it's just that extra support to guide you through something that isn't taught necessarily in schools, how to take this in an efficient manner. You have students, you have all the skills. How do you attack this in a pragmatic and an expeditious manner? How do you and it is really the best for year 12 parents. This is the time, and for students, this is the time when you want to get it done. Is the May SAT. So, but without further ado, really thank you, and I will post this to I'll send this out to all parents and students shortly. But thank you very much, Jeremy, for joining us today, and yeah, just hope to we'll continue to run these webinars and update you as we see things changing in the college admissions. Thank you very much.